Hey, what's up everybody? It's Joe from Gadgetry Tech, and in today's video, I'm going to talk about a very special headphone. This is the SJY Horizon Closed Carbon. This retails for $1,100 and it's handmade in Texas. This uses planar magnetic drivers and it has a nominal impedance of 11 ohms and it's very linear at 11 ohms, but more on that later. The other thing I want to point out is this was claimed to have a weight of 475 grams. It felt a little heavier than that to me, so I measured it and I did get a bit heavier weight. My scale puts this at over 580 grams, and I've measured this numerous times, and it's an accurate scale. I've measured a lot of other headphones that are within a few grams of the manufacturer claims. I thought maybe they weighed it without the pads, and there wasn't like a second bullet point for the weight. They claimed 475 grams. I got 491 grams without the pads, and over 580 with. So this is still a comfortable headphone. I will have a whole section dedicated on comfort, so use the chapters if you care about that. The suspension strap helps, and so do the pads. However, I did want to disclose that it is heavier than what is listed online. I did provide that feedback prior to filming this, so maybe the website will show an updated number by the time you're watching this, but again, I just wanted to let you know. So I gave that information to Apos.audio. They are the ones who sent me this particular carbon, as well as two other versions prior to filming this, because this has gone through several prototype stages where they gathered feedback from different audio people, reviewers, whoever else they used to kind of help tune the headphone itself. Now, this isn't perfectly aligned to my exact ideal headphone, but it is a really nice sound signature, and I will get into all of that. This is seriously one of the better headphones in this price range, especially in the closed back. So we'll get into all that. Now, the other thing that you get out of the box is a little carrying pouch, which is kind of like a nice little velour material, and it has SJY on it, and then you have this braided cable. It's like a, shoelace style nylon cable, and it has a 4.4 millimeter termination with this like silver carbon fiber weave inside. It feels nice, and on the other end, it's sleeved with a TRS cable. You have a blue and red sleeve, of course, to make it easier to identify which side is left and right, and then there are very clear labels on the posts of the headband itself. So it's very easy to identify which side is left and right. If you didn't look at the labels or the cable though, it's a very symmetrical headphone. The Horizon Closed Carbon uses dual 3.5 millimeter terminals on the bottom for your cable, which leads me to today's sponsor, Deconi. Apos.audio is an audio accessories brand offering a huge selection of ear pads with different material choices that changes comfort and sound quality. They sell carrying cases, adapters, IEM tips, and more, including one of my favorite products of theirs, the Ensemble cable system. These modular cable systems allow you to use a single cable for many different headphones you own. I like it because you can choose your termination, and in this case I have a 4.4 millimeter balance. This is the silver cable, and then you have a swappable pigtail for the end. All you have to do is twist to unlock this. So the idea of this is you can have several of these plugged into multiple headphones. Let's say you have an Odyssey LCDX. Well, you can have the mini XLR version, then you just have a little pigtail connected to it. This particular one with the TS sleeve works perfectly fine on the SJY Horizon Closed Carbon. You also have the Sennheiser series, like I said, and all you have to do is keep this plugged into your amp and just simply put this in. All you have to do is twist it. It locks in place, and it's very easy. It's a much nicer way to organize a lot of headphones instead of having cables for everything. It just makes things a lot faster and more convenient. Now, thanks to Deconi, I did ask if I can have a coupon code for all of my viewers, and there's no limit with this one. If you use the code GadgetryTech10 on the Deconi website, you will save 10% off your order, which is pretty awesome, and that applies to basically all the stuff they sell on the site. So getting back to the SJY Horizon Carbon Closed, this shape and design is sure to elicit some strong emotional responses. The chassis is made of CNC aluminum, using the same headband design found in the DMS Omega, but with different materials. The headband is a suspension strap made with full grain leather, and the ear cups are a hand-forged carbon fiber with satin finish. As far as handling it every day, I think this finish hides fingerprints and dust pretty well, which I really like. Obviously, it's a subjective thing, but I don't mind the way it's finished. The shape is obviously a pretty unique shape, but the rods themselves, so these are exposed aluminum rods, and I don't mind that part. I'm not a huge fan of the gold tips because I think it's the only thing that's on there that has a splash of gold. So it kind of stands out in a weird way to me. Personally, I would have preferred all silver, but again, that's just a personal preference. You do have telescoping rods, so this does get quite large. In fact, I wear this typically on the smallest setting, and you have the ability to kind of lock it in place. There's little like set screws here with the Allen wrench. Doesn't come with that in the box, but if you tighten that up, that'll minimize how easy it is to slide. And on the smallest setting, it's just too small when I'm wearing a hat. I go one click down on each side would be ideal, and now it's sitting in the perfect spot. Despite the weight, clamp force is actually really light with these, which with the heavier ear cup weight, it means it's a little bit less stable. So if you are wearing these and you look up and down, or you're planning on running with it for some reason, these are not going to stay snug on your head. Other headphones like ZMF and Sennheiser, they typically have a much stronger grip, and that elicits a different comfort response as well, because some people want the feeling of security and firmness. You know, Dan Clark, for example, has a stronger clamp. But when you have a heavier headphone like this and a strong clamp, that can get a bit much for some people. This suspension strap with the full grain leather, it feels really comfortable. I feel almost no weight on the top. So the heavier weight is offset by the lack of clamp, which again sacrifices some stability on it, but it really doesn't make it feel as heavy or unwieldy as you think. You feel it more when you move your head forward and back, because this always wants to shift. This is a really good headphone for sitting still and upright, but if you're laying back, it's not going to be the best headphone for that. Now, naturally, when we talk about comfort, it's important to talk about pads. And these pads have a mix of materials on them. You have a real leather outer, you have a sport fabric like polyester surface material, which is breathable, and that's what makes contact with your skin. Then you have a perforated leatherette on the inside. Now, the padding itself is memory foam. It's pretty squishy and it's compliant. And the ear pad dimensions are decent. It's not the tallest and widest pad I've measured. However, this is a very traditional design. It's an oval shape. It's not trying to do anything fancy. Even though it's square on the outside, the inside is oval shaped, and it has a 29mm depth. So this should fit a wide variety of ears without really having too much of a comfort issue. Naturally, when you have a loose clamp force and a very soft, compliant pad that has depth to it, glasses comfort is typically excellent. It's decent on these. The only thing I want to point out is because these have more weight to them, even with a lighter clamp, you can feel a little bit of pressure on here. However, these are so loose that the pressure is minimal. It's probably one of the few heavier headphones that have still somehow been somewhat comfortable for glasses. And it doesn't need an insane seal in order to have a lot of good bass with this particular headphone, so you're not really sacrificing too much on the sound quality side either. I want to show you an awesome feature which exposes yet another thing behind the SJY prototyping process. So these pads are nice, and they are also very easily removable. You can tell that there's some DIY element to it. This is obviously a 3D printed part right here, but the shape of this and the baffle cover has a lot of different layering with the planar magnetic driver behind it. All of these things, the shape of this and the position, affected the frequency response tuning, because I can tell you that my prototypes that I got prior to this had a different implementation here. Anytime you are doing passive filtering or applying acoustic resistance, if you will, to the driver's performance, you obviously are tuning the sound signature, but that does affect efficiency a little bit, so I did want to call that out. Now, SJY gives us a sensitivity of 90 decibels, and with an impedance of 11 ohms, you would think that'd be pretty easy to drive. 90 decibels isn't the most sensitive, but it's not like game breaking. I can tell you though that this particular model loves a strong amplifier. It really benefits from a more powerful amp, more so than basically any headphone I've owned. And I think this is harder to drive than the Sasvara Unveiled that I have, in my opinion. So just keep that in mind. You can plug this into lesser powerful amps and you'll hear music, but I think it sounded better on stronger stuff. And to put it in perspective, I reviewed the FIO K17, which is about $1,000 all-in-one amp DAC. It's a pretty solid unit with good power, and I liked all the connections and the screen and all that. This is one of the times where I could actually hear the benefits of going to a beefier amp like this. This is the X-Duo TA32. Now this guy is also about $1,000. This was sent to me by Apos.audio, so huge thanks to them. I will be reviewing this, and this is also sold on Apos.audio. This is an awesome all-in-one amp DAC. It runs a little hot, obviously, with the tube implementation, so I don't think it's going to necessarily be for everybody, but this was seriously a killer pairing. So for a couple grand, you get really good synergy here, and that was about the starting point of where I felt something like this headphone would benefit from. So I want to talk about sound quality now, but I'm going to start with the objective side first, which is the measurement side, and it kind of takes my opinion out of it, but I do want to explain a couple things. So Resolve over at headphones.com recently released a video, and these guys have been great to me, by the way. So huge thank you to the content they provide and for supporting me in the channel. They're nice people, and what's cool about this whole industry is I think a lot of the reviewers and a lot of the community really wants to see the industry pushed forward, whether it's better models, new brands, refinement of existing models, and just educating people on what to expect. So he made a comment on a recent video about reviewers and their approach with content. So I want to kind of address that. I don't want to make this whole video about that topic, but understanding how a reviewer measures something and what they're using for equipment and what that means to you are all really important things. So I'm going to do my best to kind of compress that. So I use a Gross KB006X style Pinaclone with an IC711 coupler clone. I don't have a BK5128. I don't have $40,000 to put towards it, although I'm working on it one day. And the reason why I say that is these are ear simulators. They're simulating how one particular rig hears this headphone. Doesn't mean it's how you're going to hear it exactly. And it also means that my rig is hearing it slightly differently than someone else's rig. I could send this exact headphone to them and it will measure differently on a different rig. So just to kind of summarize, if you are looking at frequency response measurements on my site, that is my testing methodology on the same exact rig for everything. I take multiple seatings, typically 3 to 5 seatings, and it represents an ideal average of each particular headphone. And sometimes if I can switch pads and you expand it, I'll show different pads. I say all of this because there will be a variance for some people. One, and how it's positioned on your head. If you have a lack of bass or a leaky seal, that will affect how it performs. This particular headphone isn't really affected by placement variance. It was almost the same exact frequency response, regardless of how I positioned it. So in this case, it really didn't matter to try to show a range of different treble and mid-range responses that usually is a byproduct of shifting around. Last thing I want to say on this is the peaks of treble and different mid-range response that I'm getting with my rig also means that you might not hear the same exact peaks. My ears hear this slightly differently, and my ears heard the Meze Lyric slightly differently than my rig played it back on. So this is just to be considered a rough ballpark, and then I'll explain how I hear it and my preferences and what I liked and disliked about it. So having said all of that, let's take a look at the frequency response. Keep in mind, this is a passive closeback. There are no electric filters. It's all passively done. It is a little bit warm. You can see a lift in the bass, particularly in the 80 hertz area. And if I turn on the inspector, you can see like a little bump right about 80 hertz. I'll turn that off because it can make things look kind of busy. And let's kick the label back on. I like the warm performance of the Horizon Closed Carbon. To me, this is an amazing bass response. It's not the best I've ever heard, but it's certainly one of the best closebacks I've ever heard. The real kicker with this particular headphone is the mid-range tonality. This is one of the best voiced closeback headphones I have ever heard, period. Regardless of price, the dynamic driver versus planar, it doesn't matter. As a closeback, and even when you compare it to many open backs out there, the mid-range voicing is absolutely incredible. And even if you look at my rig, and this is against the diffuse field target for my particular simulator, it's honestly pretty damn close to what I think is a safe and more ideal frequency response for things to sound natural. This doesn't mean that you're going to love it, but what I notice with this, at least to translate it, is a lot of voices and instruments sound the way I would expect them to in real life, and that's usually a byproduct of this mid-range tuning. You can see a little bit of a lift just about 1200 hertz on my rig, but it's super minor. Honestly, this is voiced well, and when you compare it to some other headphones, the Dan Clark stuff in particular tends to be a little bit stronger, especially close to like 2K and 3K. They're a little bit more forward. This guy, the big change with the Horizon, at least what stands out to me, is the high treble. This doesn't really show like insane treble to some people. This peak is definitely there. It's a little bit snappy at 5 kilohertz, and on my ear it does come in sooner than what I hear on like the 6000 hertz peak on the Sennheiser HD800S, but there's no huge dips around it. So it's not like this random spike just comes out of nowhere. It's still somewhat tied well to the adjacent harmonics, which is really important for instrument accuracy. The big kicker with this guy, though, is the upper treble. It has a little bit of an extra zing to it, and I think that helps create some of the sense of space that this headphone has, because it doesn't sound super congested. That's not always a byproduct of stronger upper treble, but in this particular case, it certainly helped adding some air and openness to it, even though it's a closeback. I'm not sure what level of driver matching that they do at SJY, but my particular unit, the channel matching was phenomenal. I mean, there's such a little variance between left and right, partly because positional change didn't really affect this headphone much, so it was much easier to get a very consistent frequency response. And that is also a byproduct of imaging, because if you have it shifted like this, that can alter your frequency response from left to right too on some headphones. That's not the case here, so the channel matching is excellent as well. Okay, so we talked about the objective side and measurements, and now it's time to talk about what I hear. And I'm gonna not talk too much detail about this exclusively because I have a few other comparisons and headphones I'm gonna bring out and compare it to, which I think will help paint another picture as well. So I'm going to start with the basics. This is a closed back. You do get the benefits of being a closed back, having passive noise isolation, which is moderate to good on this particular headphone. It's not as good as the Sennheiser HD620S, but it is a little bit better than the FiiO FT1 and the Sony MDR M1 that I've used in the closed back space. And I think it's better than the Focal Azurus as well in terms of noise isolation. Very much comparable, especially surprising considering how loose that fits on my head. Your passive noise isolation might vary depending on, your head shape and, if the looser clamp force is an issue or not. It's not just about blocking exterior noise. If you're listening to music at night, maybe you don't want other people to hear what you're hearing. And this is a really good performer on the sound quality side while still having the benefits of a closed back. Having said all that, usually closed backs have their own issues, especially on a planar magnetic without DSP, because you have a lot of things you have to consider. There's modal issues with the driver. You have the backwave reflections. A lot of time they have really messed up voicing, to be honest, and it doesn't always sound super natural. This doesn't have any of those issues. It was shocking how natural the mid-range timbre is. So here's the thing. As good as the bass performance is, I think the magic of this particular headphone is the mid-range. It has zero offensive traits to me in the mid-range. Everything sounds extremely natural. And that 4,000 hertz area is not as relaxed of what I usually see on planar magnetic headphones. When you look at Odyssey headphones on the closed back space, like the S20 I reviewed, the LCD XC, they're always kind of scooped in that area. It's just a byproduct of how these drivers are, traditionally tuned. The Aoun SR7000 has the same type of dip up there. This one doesn't dip as much. And as a result, I think it sounds a little bit more detailed because that area is a little bit more forward, or at least comparatively speaking to the other headphones, I've kind of A-B'd them against. So I love the way instruments sound on this. I like the way voices sound. And because there's just a tad bit of warmth to it, it doesn't have any kind of anemic, thin, or light presentation. There's really good body and volume to it. This is tuned, I don't want to say Harman because it's really... some of the voicing, I guess you could say, is like Harman based, but this comes across a little bit warmer than Harman. I typically like a warmer, thicker sounding headphone when I listen to rock music. So I've often liked a lot of ZMF headphones for rock because of that. And this one is still good for rock, but slightly less lift in that warm bass area with more forwardness in the 4K isn't always perfect for some of the rock music I listen to. And that's going to kind of tie in to some things I'm going to say later, but the bass performance on this guy, don't let that sub bass roll off fool you. I think part of that is the lighter clamp force. Like Dan Clark's, for example, the E3 has pretty immense sub bass, but I think part of that is because of it squishing on your head a little bit more and creating a stronger seal. This is looser, but I never found that it sounded like it lacked sub bass. It dug really, really deep, and it was really, really clear. This does have a pretty good balance of bass articulation and texture. So regardless if it's a longer, deeper bass note or a faster, harder hitting bass note, these particular headphones do a really good job of keeping up with either one. I never felt it was lacking, and there is a little bit of a bass shelf that you can add to these. So there is some headroom as well if you dig even more bass. I don't think these are the ultimate bass head headphones, even though the bass that you get is excellent, but I think it's controlled enough to where the vocals can still do their thing. If you boost the bass too much, it's going to make everything sound too thick and congested, and I think that takes away of some of the pros that you have from a good mid-range like this. So the bass all the way up to the high mid-range in this headphone is damn near perfect, and it varies a little depending on the music you listen to, not so much the headphone being a fault of any kind. I think the biggest thing that's going to get some people is the treble tuning. There is some zing in the upper treble, and it doesn't always, expose itself. Just once in a while, you get a song that's brighter. This isn't going to hide that. This is basically bedazzling all of your treble. It has a little bit of a glisten and shimmer to it, and frankly, it helps with the staging and spaciousness by not being completely rolled off or overly dampened sounding. This sounds very lively and open. It doesn't sound like everything's getting slowed down. So it's a very fun listen. It's very engaging. and highly resolving. Okay, so I knew I'd be talking about a lot of other headphones when I make some comparisons, so I figured I'd bring a few out. You're going to notice a couple things. One is I'm using Omega stands for this part. Don't use these. Don't try this at home. I'm only using this for this video. They come off the second I'm done filming, because if this is squeezing against the pad, you're speed running the wear of your pad. You pay good money for a headphone. Don't wear out your pads. Get something with a hook that holds it and suspends it. Lay them carefully on your desk, or if you have something like the SJY Horizon, if you take the cables out, it sits upright on its own, which is pretty cool. The other thing you're going to notice is I don't have any Dan Clark headphones here. Now, I reviewed the E3, loved that headphone, wasn't perfect for me, but I'll make some loose comparisons to that. And then the Noir X is going to be a big item that I know a lot of people want more direct comparisons to. I'm sorry I don't have one here. I did ask for one in the past. I just haven't heard back from Dan Clark, which is fine. So I've listened to that headphone several times at different audio shows. I'm going to do a very brief take on it, and then we'll move on into ones I've had much more intimate listen times with. So the Noir X, I felt like it had slightly more sub bass. I think part of it's a byproduct of being a more clampy headphone. It squeezes my head more for sure. It was still comfortable, but the stronger clamp, I just think the bass focused a little bit deeper, whereas the SJY Horizon sounded just a tad warmer to me. Partly, I think, because on the Noir X, the vocals, like the whole 1 to 3K area, I felt like vocals had just a little bit more bite to it. It wasn't really shouty for me. I still felt like it was fine for most tracks I listened to. Every now and then you get a song that really doesn't do well on a headphone that's kind of voiced strongly in that area. But for the most part, I felt like vocals just cut through just slightly more forward on the Noir X, followed by a more relaxed upper mid-range and treble presentation compared to the Horizon. The Horizon's upper treble is noticeably more airy and bright. And as a result, I think with some listens, when you listen to the Noir X, it sounds a little bit more reserved and calm. And it's fine. It's super accurate. It sounds a little bit more intimate to me, whereas this guy sounds a little bit more lively and energetic. Both of them are voiced really well, especially in the mid-range. I actually lean towards liking the Horizon more for mid-range tonality, and I lean towards liking the Dan Clark Noir X just slightly more for the upper treble, because it didn't really ever have a song where I found the treble too much. So if you find that it's lacking, obviously you can EQ it anyway, but that's kind of where it's stacked up at a high level for me. The E3 is a little bit more of an upgrade in the rest of the bass. It wasn't just sub bass. I felt like the E3's bass delivery overall is some of the best I've ever heard on a closed back, and it follows a very similar suit to the Noir X as far as voicing goes. So I think it's more hand in hand. It's just a more resolving, more performant headphone when it comes to technicalities and busier tracks. That's kind of what you pay for with the E3 over the Noir X for me. Great headphone otherwise, but it's twice the price, as is half of these here. So I'm not going to get too far in the weeds on this. I'm going to make some loose comparisons here. The Lyric 2 is still a headphone that I really, really enjoy. The bass, the deeper bass is awesome. I've loved using the Lyric 2s if you ever want to watch movies or consume media content. I just like the voicing on them. They're actually more relaxed sounding than the Horizon Carbon. Some people found the Lyric 2 to sound a little bit too shimmery. There is just the slightest sense of graininess in the vocals. Even though the vocals are slightly relaxed, I found that the vocal delivery, even though it's more forward on the Horizon, they also sounded slightly smoother. The Renaro driver on this just had a touch of graininess to it that creeps up on certain songs. But for the most part, when that wasn't an issue, this was a nice, easy listen. This has a very, there's one treble spike that happens closer to 11,000 hertz for me. I think on my rig it measured closer to 12. But I had a little bit of a sharp treble spike, which compared to the rest of the treble kind of jumped out. So it was EQable once you find where it comes from, and then it's even better to listen to. And this one too had removable pads with a magnet, which is pretty awesome. This is a gorgeous headphone. I find this extremely comfortable to wear because the clamp force is between Dan Clark and the SJY. Wonderful pads. I really do like this headphone, but it's twice the price. So, you know, your value might change a little bit. Now, then you have the Aoun or Own SR7000. This is a $600 closeback. On the frequency response charts, when you measure it, it looks like it has more sub bass than the Horizon Closed. And when you listen to it, I definitely felt the opposite. Even though this can go down to 20 hertz, I felt that the tactility and overall bass performance and oomph was noticeably better on the Horizon. So this is a good example why you wouldn't exclusively trust the measurements that you see on one particular rig. So I do still like this. The imaging performance is fantastic. It's a much more relaxed presentation from basically like 4,000 to 6,000 hertz. So it can sound a little bit dark. It's a super laid back listen. Very, very comfortable, neutral sounding headphone, but it does sound a little bit dampened compared to the Horizon. Everything just sounds slightly more constrained, if you will. It's almost like the headphone is stuck wearing a suit and you're telling it to go dance. It's just a little bit more constricted. That's the biggest difference I can hear between the two. When you EQ them to match each other frequency response wise, it still is a lovely headphone. And honestly, it's always been one of the best closebacks for gaming. I think it's only kind of leveled up by the SJY just because the frequency response is a little bit more revealing with certain audio cues on the competitive side. So I know some people don't care about gaming, but that's just one way I can kind of explain that difference. And then the other part of that is, when you're listening to music, that relaxed area is kind of nice for long-term listening. But if you're doing more critical listening for a few tracks at a time, you're going to hear more subtle nuances and differences in even the micro details on something like the Horizon, just because it's not reduced so much compared to this. Then you have the Bokeh Closed, which has, I think, so this is I don't want it to sound like a negative thing because I like the Bokeh Closed and I have suede pads on it, which is my favorite pairing with it. I love these for rock. This is one of my favorite $1,000 headphones for rock. They have more of an emotional, warm, gooey listen, and vocals are relaxed. The treble is super smooth. This is like the headphone where you sit back and drink a scotch at night. Something that you're just chilling and listening to music with, and maybe you're not thinking about the tracks as critically. It's not as, I guess, hi-fi sounding as something like the Horizon, which is more geared towards an analytical listen. It's much more resolving, but it's also a little bit more energetic as well. And not everyone's looking for that. I think the voicing's still okay with this one. There's definitely a lot more warmth in the bass, and if you switch to the suede pads, it reduces it slightly, but there's definitely still a lift at like the whole 200 to 400 hertz area, which is really fun to listen to for rock music, like I said, but it's not the one I'm going to pick for a sub bass as a byproduct. When you compare it to stuff like this or Dan Clark, the Meze Lyric 2, for example, all of them dig deeper. The bass performance on the Bokeh is noticeably better than the SR7000 as well. Again, regardless of what the frequency response has, I found the dynamics and punchiness of the Bokeh to be really nice. This is a special headphone to me. This is the Caldera Closed. Now, I bought the Caldera Open. I think I have it on my shelf right there. I bought the Caldera Open. That's a totally different headphone. This guy is $3,500 as a base price. This is $1,000. This has a more natural mid-range voicing. This has a slightly leaner bass on the Caldera Closed, but what I find is what you're paying for 3.5 times the Horizon, to me, is you have a more technically proficient headphone delivery. When I listen to things that get really complex and busy, I feel like I get more detail and separation of instruments on the Caldera Closed. And I do like the treble presentation on the Caldera Closed because, again, it's not as bright. The voicing, every now and then, one voice just comes across a little bit sharper sounding to me, whereas some songs you can't hear any fault in the tuning. It's still an enjoyable listen. To give a few examples of what I mean, there are obviously millions of songs out there, right? And when you listen to something like Death Row by Chris Stapleton, or the Younger Years by the Milk Carton Kids, these are very different songs. They sound absolutely incredible on this. It's so much so that you almost don't think, like, does it get much better than this? That's how well these perform, which at the price point is pretty remarkable, especially being a closeback. They just have so much layering and that bass warmth, the tactility of it, the voicing sounding natural. Everything just sounds perfect and it's firing on all cylinders. And then I switched to an Indian style like EDM song. It's called Hakate by Amanti, and it's again showcases the bass performance of the Horizon, but it is a little bit too shimmery for me, and honestly I can't really listen to it too much at a higher volume because it's like too metallic sounding. So that song kind of exposes some of the faults with this, whereas if I heard that song on either of the Dan Clark headphones, for example, that wouldn't be an issue for me. It would sound great and I would enjoy that. So this kind of plays in the whole duality of what one works with what works for one song might not always be perfect for another. Which leads us to a question that I get asked, and I see get asked all the time, is to pick the perfect headphone. And I can tell you this now, it doesn't exist. And there are so many reasons behind this. So even if you ignore money being an issue, comfort, build quality, just get rid of all of that and let's just focus on sound quality. Even if you go past your personal preferences and what your hearing capabilities are, let's say you pick what you think is the perfect sound signature and you only listen to one genre. Let's say you just listen to EDM and you found the perfect headphone for a song you always listen to. You're blown away by it. It's a darker, chill, laid-back song, and this is just money. Then you switch songs, and it's a high-energy, super bright, resolving, whatever song. That will then all of a sudden sound like it's too much. So now you're stuck with a few very critical decisions to make. So we have several paths to address this. One is do EQ. It's free, and you can adjust the frequency response based off what you're listening to, and in a lot of cases, that can make it easier to enjoy the content you consume, again, without spending money. Another more cost-prohibitive approach is to just have multiple headphones with different sound signatures, hopefully different. Some people just have an absurd collection of a lot of headphones that sound the same, but you get the idea. The third one is to literally just pick something that's safe enough. Let's say you don't want to deal with EQ, you don't want to deal with constantly changing headphones out, whether it's a budget or preference thing. You pick a sound profile that's safe enough to not make you wince or dislike some of the stuff you have, but also isn't so safe that the really chill, low quality songs sound like hot garbage. You want to find something that is kind of like that happy middle ground. And that's a lot of times why you hear certain headphones out there being suggested a lot, because they work well as like an everyday headphone, which to some people can be boring. So you can see where this conundrum comes from. And that brings me back to the Horizon Closed Carbon. And I hope this summary kind of ties it all together well. The Horizon Closed Carbon is special enough where if I'm doing a bunch of audio demos, let's just pretend I have 50 headphones at my disposal, but I only have 20 minutes to show a friend several pieces of gear. The Horizon is a special enough headphone where I would want to bring it out to show people, but it's a safe enough headphone where I don't feel like I'm at risk of making a grave mistake of suggesting that someone try it. This is like that magic dancing act that for $1,000, SJY has pulled off quite masterfully. Now, if you are in the EQ camp, because as a whole, everything is pretty well synergized between each octave in the frequency response range, it's actually quite easy to EQ. I'm not dealing with modal issues. I have a high treble shelf, and the bass is what it is. It's a really nice bass profile, but if you want more, you could just add a low bass shelf and lift it. Or if you want to have it sound leaner, just easily reduce bass as a whole. The same thing happens with treble. I basically didn't do any tuning to this. I just did -3 dB over 10,000 hertz. I think I picked like 11,000 hertz -3 dB with a wide Q just to table it off a little bit. And it's almost perfect for everything. So being very easy to EQ is another benefit of it. With that being said, this was a super long review, but I really hope you got some more information out of it. I know $1,000 headphone's not going to be for everybody out there. I'm not trying to convince you that, but in this price range, the Horizon Closed Carbon is insanely competitive, so much so that it actually goes toe-to-toe with some of the much more expensive headphones out there, even if they're an open back. It's a pretty remarkable feat. I hope you found this video helpful. Don't forget to like and subscribe. I'd love to see you at the next one. Stay safe, and thank you so much for watching. Take care.